We are Life Church Livonia.
Good morning, Life Church Livonia. How is everyone? That's awesome. It is so good to be with you. My name is Brian. I'm the pastor here, and I'm just grateful that we get to join together today and be a family. And I'm super excited about this new series that we start today called Address the Mess. And one of the things that we are really encouraging you to do is to not just come and sit and listen to the sermons, but to engage and take it a step further and be a part of a community group, which we call life groups. And so Jeff, he's walking out the door right now, is in charge of those groups. He has a table out there you can get signed up and or get connected in some way, because we really believe that God does stuff when we're here together, when we sit in rows and you listen to me and you come and you worship with the band. But some of the most beautiful work that we do in our lives, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, happen in circles rather than rows as we get together and we do life together. And so we just want to really encourage you. That's the next step, because what we're going to be talking about here on Sunday mornings is going to get fleshed out then in those small groups as we do this church-wide campaign on Address the Mess. And it's not just us here at Life Church Livonia that's doing this. We've agreed to partner with all of the other life churches in the area. There are 3 of us currently. We are about to have another church planted here in this year, Life Church Auburn Hills. I'm so excited about that. Many of you guys don't know that we are part of a movement of churches, and so we are the 3rd in that process of life churches planted, independent churches that are intentionally partnered together as a family to reach people for the sake of the gospel, the good news of Jesus. And so we're all doing this, Address the Mess. And we got this idea of this series from North Point Ministries in Atlanta, and just a really important topic for us to lean into. Because what we want to acknowledge right here in this place is that whether you're religious or not, whether or not you come to this church regularly or any church regularly, we want to acknowledge that every single one of us have made some messes in our life along the way. And we're not just talking about physical messes. We're not talking about when you drop the bag of powdered sugar donuts, right? We're not just talking about when my son chose to eat the crunchy granola bar on the couch. You know what I'm talking about? The really crumbly ones that got everywhere and you find yourself wanting to vacuum at 11 o'clock at night. We're not just talking about those messes. What we want to address is that we have messes in our lives that are emotional, that are relational, that are spiritual, that are a much bigger deal than simply crumbs on the couch. And to start in that place and to say, listen, we all have those moments. Every single one of us have messes in our life. So instead of pretending like it's not true, instead of coming to church every Sunday or going to work every week and pretending like everything is perfect, we're just going to acknowledge it. We have messes. We all make them. We've all been a part of them. We've all experienced the ramifications of someone else's mess that spills over into your life. And so instead of ignoring it, we're just going to talk about it. And we're going to spend 5 weeks talking about it. And today we start with just the identification of the mess. But we're not going to leave you there. We're going to walk you through a process of responding to the messes in your life and the messes of other people's life. Because like it or not, there are moments in all of our lives where we are a big, hot mess. In fact, the group text for my small group is called the Hot Mess Society, okay? For a reason. We all live in that place, and we use that word, hot mess, but I didn't realize that it actually has had different meanings throughout the generations, and I thought this was really interesting, and it leads us in a direction that I think is important for us. Because in the 1800s, hot mess didn't mean what you think it meant. In the 1800s, hot mess was food, specifically food in the military, that they had a mess hall, and you went for hot mess, which was a hot meal. Sometimes it's throwing onto a plate a big pile of something, right? Unidentified mystery meat. It was a hot mess, right? People were grateful for it because it meant that they got to eat. And then in the 1900s, it morphed a little bit and it became a hot mess was a situation. It wasn't a person yet or a group of people. It was a situation that you stepped into that was confusing or dangerous. It was a hot mess in the 1900s. In the late 1900s, and starting to get into the 2000s, it became what most of us know it today, which is someone who is disheveled or incompetent. That person is a hot mess. It went from a meal to a situation to a person. That person is a hot mess. But really recently, and I didn't know this until I started doing some research, a hot mess has become something different. And I wasn't even aware of this. It's become someone in obvious disarray or disorganization, especially while remaining attractive in spite of it. That you literally are hot and a mess at the same time. It's a brand new, and so my definition of that kind of new definition of hot mess is this. It means that you're an attractive disaster. An attractive disaster. It's fabulous. And for some of us, this has become our goal in life. Is that we know that we're a mess, but we want to look good while we're doing it, right? That we know that we're a mess, but we don't want anyone else to see the mess. And so we paste on this fake smile, or we get up and we take a shower and we put on fresh clothes and do our makeup and whatever it is, and we go to work or we go to church, and we step into our relationships, and we look good on the outside, attractive on the outside, everything together on the outside, but internally we know that we're a mess. We know that there's parts of our lives, places in our life that are a complete disaster. We look attractive on social media. We look like we have it all together online, but in our home and in our nuclear family, with our closest friends, everyone knows that things are not okay, that we are a mess. And so in some ways, that's an over response to the struggle. It's a compensation for the mess that we are experiencing because we don't feel like it's okay to be honest about the mess. That we get stuck in this place where we feel like we're the only ones that have a mess, and therefore we have to hide it from everyone else, because if we come to church and we actually admit that we're a mess, then we'll somehow be left outside, not invited in. And so we put on this fake exterior that allows us to be a hot mess, an attractive disaster. Because if anyone knew how much of a disaster we were, we believe that they wouldn't receive us, they wouldn't love us, they wouldn't care for us, there wouldn't be a place for us here. That's one type of response to the mess. The other is the opposite of that. We're like, oh, absolutely, I'm a mess and I don't really care anymore. Like that's the person who goes to the grocery store without having showered for the last 2 days, wearing the same sweatpants they've been wearing for a week, dragging their screaming toddler behind them and just like, I don't even care anymore. Like this is me. Hot mess, yep, right here, check me out. On display. It's the person who who doesn't just share the good things on social media, it's the person that shares everything on social media because you're like, I just don't care anymore. And so they're both an over-response in one direction or another. And if we're not careful on the flip side of just saying, I just don't care, here I am, my life is a total disaster, if we're not careful there, what we can do is slide into cynicism. That we so don't care that we make no effort to correct the things that need to be corrected. To engage the things that do need to be engaged. And that cynicism can become toxic. And the truth is this, and where we want to start today is this, is that what gathers us together, what draws us all together in this space, what we all have in common is mess. All of us have it. Some of us are in the middle of it right now. Some of us have come out of it in the past. Some of us are about to step into it in the future. What we all have in common is the mess. And we all deal with it in different ways. And we all respond to it in different ways. Not only the mess inside of ourselves, but the mess we see around us. So where I want to start is to talk a little bit about how we respond to other people's messes. And then I want to dig into Scripture and help you to see that the mess that we all have, the mess that is universally found in all of us, actually points to the reality and the presence of God. The fact that we can identify and see the mess in our life actually points to the presence of God. And we're going to look at Scripture and see how that's true. But I want to start, before we get there, and just talk for a moment, real talk, about how we as the church, respond to other people's messes. And I want to give you a couple of pointers about things you should do when you see a mess in someone else's life. And the first is this, is that I want to encourage us to be a student instead of a critic. To be a student instead of a critic. And when I say that, what I mean is that to be a student of that person's story. That we don't just see the mess, but we see the person behind the mess, and we begin to ask the question, well, what's their story? And then we're genuinely interested in them as a human being. Because what happens as we begin to hear their story and we begin to see the story behind the mess, it gives us far more grace for the individual than we would have otherwise. We have to learn to be a student instead of a critic. We are really, really quick to point fingers. Really, really, really quick to judge and accuse and to condemn. In our friend circles, in our broader social circles, in our church circles, in our political circles, we're really, really quick to condemn and to judge. But I want to ask us, what would it look like as a church if we chose to be students of people's stories rather than instant critics of their messes? The messes are real. The messes are real. But what would it look like if we found out the story behind it? And then not only to be a student instead of a critic, but also to be willing to look at the mess in the mirror. That a lot of times, the people that are the biggest critics, the people that are most quick to judge, are also the people that are unwilling to look at the mirror and see themselves. To remember that person's messy, and their mess is different than yours, but you have mess as well. You have mess as well. And that all of us are one or two bad decisions away from becoming the person we're judging. Becoming that mess that we condemn. And then not only are we one or two bad decisions away from becoming that, there are times, in fact, when we are the cause of other people's messes. Our actions or overreactions, our judgment or lack of care or lack of love actually has become part of the story of someone else's mess. And until we choose to look into the mirror, we won't realize that. Until we choose to look at our own mess in our life, we won't begin to be able to understand what it looks like to give grace to other people. We have to look at the mess in the mirror and realize that everyone has it. Every person in this room has had mess at some point. Some people are just better at hiding it than others. Some people's messes are just way more public than others. We've seen that lately in our country. What happens when messes become public? It's brutal. And the way that we respond is brutal. And the way that we act towards one another is not helpful. What would it look like if we were a student instead of a critic? When we look in the mirror and we see our own messes, there's many times when we begin to realize that, I've dug a pit for myself. Or that person, they dug a pit for themselves. They are so deep in their mess that there is no way that they can get out alone. And we become super aware of that. And in that moment, church, what I want you to understand is that the way we respond to the person who's in the pit matters. The way that we respond to the person who is so deep in it, there's no way they can climb out on their own. It matters because the way we respond will oftentimes determine whether that person is ever willing to reach out their hand for help, not only to you, but to God. The way we respond to people who are deep in a struggle matters because it will impact and affect their willingness to receive grace and help from the God who can give it better than we ever could. It matters how we respond. When you see people in that kind of hole, choose to become a student instead of a critic. Choose to look at the mess in the mirror before you jump in. I want you to imagine what kind of reputation the church would have if we became that. If we learned these lessons, if we learned these lessons about what it meant to be a student instead of a critic, to look at the mess in the mirror first, if we really learned that and then we applied that, what kind of reputation would the church have? It would be a really good one. Like there's a people that are filled with love, that are filled with grace, that are filled with mercy. Those are a people that understand what it means to be real. It's part of the reason why at Life Church we say real people, real God, real life. We want to actually embody that. And to be a church that has a reputation for that. Because as Christians, we believe with everything that we are that the mess that brings us together, this common mess, is also the mess that draws God near. It's the mess that draws God near. We've seen John 3:16. It's plastered at sporting events and in public forums. And I think a paraphrase of that could easily be, for God so loved the mess that he sent his one and only son. God so loved the messy people here that he sent his one and only son. The gospel, the good news about God, is not simply that he sat up in heaven and he looked down on earth and he saw the mess and judged it. That's not the good news. The good news is that he sat in heaven, he looks down, he sees the mess, he sees our mess, and yeah, he judges it. He says, that's broken, it's wrong, but he takes it to the next step and he says, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to send my son to actually engage it. I'm not going to sit outside the mess. I'm actually going to step into the mess. I'm going to look down on the mess. I'm going to see it. I'm going to love it. I'm going to respond to it. And I'm going to send my son directly into it. No matter how deep, no matter how dark, no matter how hard, no matter how insurmountable your mess feels to you or appears to you when you look at other people's mess, Jesus is willing to go all the way into it with you. He's proven it over and over and over again. Nobody expected God to show up in the world. Nobody expected God to do this, to introduce something as beautiful as grace and mercy and hope and love into our mess. The mess of our life, the mess in this world, the mess in this church is actually the opening into which God steps through. It's a space that allows God to step into our life. And when we begin to acknowledge our mess, when we begin to open our eyes and look in the mirror and see what it really is that we're dealing with, it's the beginning step, the first step into acknowledging the very presence of God in our midst. And it's a concept that's kind of hard to get. It can kind of be a little mind-boggling to realize that our mess actually reveals God. Well, how is that possible? And so what I want to do is I want to flesh that out a little bit through Scripture and to dive into some of the writings of one of the hot messes in the New Testament. His name was Paul. He wrote over half the New Testament, total hot mess. This guy, he thought he had it all together. He was all about appearances. We talked about the attractive disaster. That was Paul, absolutely. And he talks about what it looks like to become aware of our mess in Romans chapter 3. And I'm going to read a few of those verses to you now. It's from Romans 3, starting in verse 19. It says, "Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God." And some of us are like, I have no idea what that means. Common language, Brian, bring it down. And it is tough because Paul was writing to an audience thousands of years ago who knew exactly what he was saying. They understood what it was. So I want to break it down for you a little bit at a time and start with this idea of what it means to be under the law. Because Paul is saying, hey, we all get it that we're under the law. And he was talking specifically about the Jewish law, but I think there's something bigger at work here, something bigger at play here that Paul's also making reference to. When we are under the law of something, it means that if you live in America, if you live here in the United States, you are under U.S. federal law. If you live in America, in Michigan, you're not only under the law of the whole United States, this nation's laws, but you're also under the law of Michigan and the laws of the county and the laws of the city that you live in. You are under that law. There are tribunals that we have that are international. That there's international courts that try people who break common laws of humanity. Like laws that are bigger than a nation, bigger than a state, bigger than a certain culture. There are actual courts out there that will charge people and try them for crimes against humanity. There's laws that we are under. If you join a club, if I join the rec center here in Livonia, I have to agree to abide by their laws. If I break the rules at the rec center, they kick me out, right? That's the way it works. You're under the law. If you visit another country and you break their law that you were under while you're there, even if you didn't know it was true, you still can be held accountable to that. This is what it means to be under the law. And Paul says, listen, I want you to understand that all of us are under some type of law. And it leads us to this place in our thinking and in our processing where we begin to recognize that there's actually a higher law that transcends culture. There's a higher moral law that transcends culture that we see as a common thread woven throughout all of humanity. There's certain things that no matter where you go, no matter who you talk to, that all of us will agree they are wrong. And you could probably, if you dig deep enough, find a little minor subculture someplace that would celebrate some of these things. But even so, even in some of those subcultures, people know deep inside that what they're doing is wrong. Let me give you an example. There is no culture that I could find or think about anywhere on this planet that celebrates shaming someone else as a good thing. I can't think of a single one. There might be certain subsets that actually enjoy shaming other people and they celebrate it externally, but if it gets turned around on them and they feel shame or they feel like someone is shaming them on purpose, they're like, oh, this doesn't feel good. Why? Because there's a higher moral law. They know it's right and they know it's wrong. Think about lying. Is that even if there's a person that celebrates someone as doing a great job of deceiving other people, they might enjoy lying to someone, but they know it's wrong. And they know it's wrong because when it happens to them, it feels gross. When you get lied to, when someone shames you, we know it's wrong. We don't look at someone treating their child rudely at the park and be like, they're killing it today. Like they're winning at rudeness. No, you're like, that's broken. And we see it. It's a thread that's woven throughout all of humanity, whether you are in the United States or Canada or Mexico or in the middle of Africa, in Kenya. Or whether you're in Kenya or you're in China or you're in Mongolia, people can see that there's a common thread built into our very DNA, a higher moral law that is a part of who we are as a human being. And we fall under it. And even when we try to justify those actions, those behaviors, deep down inside of us, we all know that they are wrong. We know that there's a standard that exists that none of us live up to perfectly. And when we begin to recognize that, when we begin to recognize that there's a higher moral law, we begin to realize that this higher standard originated somewhere. Where did it come from? How is it that that's true? How is it true that somehow built into the code, the DNA of what it means to be human is this higher moral standard? Where did it come from? It had to come from someplace. And we believe that it came not just from some place, but from someone. We believe that thread that exists throughout humanity actually is imprinted into us from God. And the point of this realization isn't just to make you feel terrible. The point of this realization isn't that you're called to be perfect. What does Paul say here? He says, now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that what? Every mouth may be silenced. Paul says, stop talking. Stop pointing fingers. Stop condemning. Stop judging. Stop being what I was, Paul says. Paul was all of those things. Paul was not the guy who was silent. He was the guy that pointed fingers. He was the guy that condemned. He was the guy that looked at other people's messes and said, your mess is not okay and you need to change that now. He was a guy that killed Christians because he thought that they were making a mess of his religion. And what does he say? He begins to realize that when I become aware that there's something bigger that I'm a part of, that I will never do perfectly, he said, when you become aware of that, you need to actually just stop talking. Look in the mirror. Recognize the mess. Recognize that the whole world will be held accountable to God. We are a mess. And we have to be willing to look in the mirror. And when we do, we should be silent. But Paul goes on. Next verse, he says, therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our sin. This is what it means. That awareness of the law, awareness that there's the higher moral calling that all of us have implanted into us, it's not enough. It doesn't save us. It doesn't make you right. No matter how hard you try to be perfect at it, no matter what you do to attain this idea of perfection of exterior and internal, life, no matter what you do, the law and the awareness of your own brokenness, your own mess will never save you. It will simply make you aware that you need to be saved. This is why, part of the reason why some people don't like coming to church. Why? Because they come to church And they hear things that make them aware of their brokenness, and it feels yucky, and they leave feeling yucky instead of leaving having experienced the grace and love of God embodied in God's people. It's part of the reason why in some spaces in the world, Christians have a really bad name, because we're better at pointing fingers and judging than we are at loving. And so this awareness of our brokenness, awareness of our mess, people don't want to engage that because they're like, wow, this conscious thing that you're like triggering in me, and your teaching is triggering, and your worship is triggering in me, it actually just makes me feel gross and I want to leave. The last series that we did, for 4 weeks, we talked about what does it look like to love your neighbor. Some people came and felt convicted by that. Some people came and they thought, wow, I really am not killing it when it comes to loving my neighbor. Like all those things we talked about, I don't do any of them. And if you left feeling condemned, that was not the goal. The goal was that you would leave feeling empowered, that God can meet you in that space, empower a transformation in you that allows you to give his love to people, to pull out of a well that you didn't fill, but instead God filled. God's word, what we teach here on a Sunday morning, is both a mirror and a reminder. It's a mirror because it allows us to see ourselves clearly, to see who we are and to see what we aren't. And it's a reminder to say, this is what you could be and what you were called to be. God's word is a mirror and it is a reminder. So here's my question for you today. What is it about God's law, about this higher moral calling that we have? What is it about that? This law that you are under, what does it remind you that you are not? What are the spaces in your life that as you begin to think about it and you begin to look at your own mess, you begin to look in the mirror, what are the spaces that you see when you look in the mirror that you're like, man, that was not a win. That was a struggle. That was a fail. Where are those spaces where you begin to be aware of the mess? When you have that aha moment, when this light bulb goes on, when you realize, man, that's off. You're one step away. You're one step away from beginning to realize that very awareness of your mess points to God. How is it possible, friends, that all of us could have that? Our mess points to something bigger than us. It points to what Paul says in Romans 3:23, this awareness that he has, that he said, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. This was Paul's big aha moment. This guy that tried to be perfect, this guy that tried to do religion perfectly, he's like, listen, all of us fall short. And Paul is saying, this is actually good news. Because it means that we're all common. We're all the same. We all fall short. We all sin. We all have messes in big and small ways. And he reminds us that the reason that we know a mess when we see one is that we are one. The reason we know a mess when we see one is that we have been one or we're about to be one. The reason that you know that marriage is jacked up is because you kind of have built inside of you an idea of what marriage should be. And you're like, I know that's not it. I know that mine's not it. The reason that you understand, that you know how a person should have responded to that moment is because built into you is this awareness that I haven't always responded well. We know a mess when we see one because we are one. We know that person should have just walked away, but they didn't, and we know that it was wrong, that they said what they said. Awareness of our messes awakens us to something outside of ourselves to whom we are accountable. Awareness of our messes awakens us to something outside of ourselves to which we are accountable. But God didn't just give you the law so that you can try harder, friends. He gave us the law. He gave us the conscience that's built inside of us to make you aware of your mess and to awaken you to the reality, this reality that there's someone to whom not only you're accountable to, but is reaching out to you. Reaching out to you. C.S. Lewis, one of the most popular Christian authors in the last 100 years, didn't always live his life as a follower of God. Wasn't always a Christian. In fact, he was a vocal critic of belief in God at one point in his life. But he began to see things in his life. He began to see this kind of thread throughout humanity, this common higher moral law, and it began to really cause him to think. The process. He would watch people arguing, and he would say, they're both appealing to a higher moral law that they didn't create. They're both appealing to a standard that they didn't invent. That has nothing to do with living in England or living in China. They're appealing in that argument to something that is outside of them, that someone or something outside of them created. Where did it come from? And he said in his writings in Mere Christianity, he says, I do not pretend to be better than anyone else. He's like, I'm a mess too. He says, I'm only trying to call attention to a fact. The fact that this year or this month or more likely this very day, we have failed to practice ourselves the kind of behavior we expect from other people. This is him just realizing, hey, there's a higher moral law that we expect other people to live into when they're engaging us, but we don't always live into when we engage them. He's like, we're all a mess. And he goes on to say, we're really bad about blaming our messes on other people, but taking full responsibility for our successes. Does this make sense to us? That we're like, hey, this mess is not my fault. This mess is your fault, her fault, their fault. But when I'm winning, when I'm doing things that aren't messy, when I'm doing things that are neat and tidy and beautiful and well done, that's all me, baby. Right? Why is that? It messed with C.S. Lewis's head, and it began to point him to something that was outside of himself. Someone that was outside of himself. And he says this in Mere Christianity, the law of gravity tells you what stones do if you drop them, but the law of human nature tells you what human beings ought to do and do not. What human beings ought to do and do not. He said there's something bigger and amazing that's outside of it that comes from God. He calls it the law of human nature. And he goes on, he says there's something above and beyond the ordinary facts of men's behavior, and yet quite definitely real. A real law which none of us made, but which we find pressing on us. And it led him to Christ. It led him to faith in God. It led him to, instead of being a critic of other people's messes, instead of being a critic of his own mess, it led him to a place where he was able to actually meet the God who steps into our messes, who says, I see you. It was a beginning point for him, and my hope is that it's a beginning point for you. For all of us to start this week on a common playing field. Every single one of us, whether we've been coming to church our whole life, or whether this is our first time. Whether we come regularly or we come super irregularly. To all, right now, just admit and be aware to look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm a mess. And my very awareness of that mess points to a God who imprinted in me the ability to see that messes exist. I'm going to start there. I'm going to use it as a beginning point, Lord. But I'm not just going to stop there. I'm going to realize that, yeah, I'm actually a hot mess. The final definition of a hot mess. An attractive disaster. Think about this. That in the midst of your mess, in the midst of your disaster, the previous ones and the present ones and the future ones, that God still is attracted to you. Relationally, spiritually, engaged with you, desiring to draw close to you no matter how deep your pit goes. No matter how broad or wide your failure feels, that you are still an attractive disaster to God. All of us. Level playing field. That God still loves you deeply. God still wants to give you grace intimately. God still wants to sit down with you in the midst of that most brutal, relational, emotional, spiritual mess and bring healing out of it. This is the hope of the gospel. That our God didn't just sit far removed judging the mess, but that our God stepped into it in the form of Jesus to make it possible for us to find redemption in the middle of the mess. And the moment that we begin to acknowledge that a mess exists, we've taken the first step to not only acknowledging that there is a God, but actually stepping into a relationship with that God. Messes are hard. Messes are messy, but our God is real in the midst of them. And our messes can actually lead us to a place where we acknowledge him. My hope for you today is twofold. First off, if you are in a spot where you realize I'm the condemner, I'm the one who stands on the edge of the pit and looks down in at other people's mess and makes it worse by heaping judgment on them. My hope for you is that you would choose today to be a student rather than a critic. That you would choose today to be a lover instead of a hater. That you would choose to extend a hand of welcome and an arms that hug rather than fingers that point and fists that shake. And that we would become known as a place that does this. Not who looks at a mess and says, that's okay, what you did was okay, but a person that looks at it and says, I want to know your story. And I want to love you out of that by inviting you into the arms of our loving God who met me in my mess. That's my first hope. My second is for those of you who come here today and you know that you're in the mess or that you have been the mess. The ones who come here today and you know that you are far from God, that you've held God off at more than arm's length, like 10 arms length from you. Because you're afraid that if he sees your mess, that he won't want to be in a relationship with you. But the deal is he already does see your mess. He saw your mess before time began, and he still chose to come and send his son, Jesus, so that you could be set free from the messes in your life. So I want to pray for us. I want to pray for you, regardless of where you find yourself. My hope is that we would look in the mirror today, and that when we look in the mirror, we would see that God is standing right next to us in the midst of it. Would you pray with me? Jesus, right now, just in our quiet space with our eyes closed, God, we ask that in this space right now that we would look in the mirror, knowing that you stand next to us as we do. That we would truly open our eyes to who we are, to the messes that we've made, to the spaces where we failed and the spaces where we've struggled, God, and that we would know that you choose to step into that with us. God, we confess that there are times when we do not respond well to the messes in other people's lives, where we choose to sit on the seat of judgment, and now, God, we confess that that is not a seat that we should be sitting in ever. But instead, we choose, God, today to confess our struggles in that area, to confess the messy way we've responded to other people, and we choose, God, to choose love, to choose grace, to choose to be a student rather than a critic, God. Help us to do that. And God, for those of us who sit here today, knowing that we are in need of your grace, knowing that we are in need of your love, knowing that we are in need of a God who will step into the deepest, darkest pits, God, we choose you. To no longer hold you at arm's length, far from you, but instead to invite you in. To invite you in to give us forgiveness. To invite you in to help us to see a way out. We entrust our lives to you. We entrust our messes to you, knowing that you are faithful. Pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who chose to step into our mess. Amen.